Hello, all. Let's talk about the common foodborne microorganisms and the illnesses that they cause. But before we get into it, let's have a quick look at the common foods that are involved in such foodborne illnesses, the high risk foods or the perishable foods. These are perishable because they support the growth of microorganisms and normally they are eaten without further cooking or much cooking. So this includes cooked meat, cooked poultry, milk products like cream, or it could be custard. It includes seafood, especially shellfish is involved in that. We have cooked rice, which is a common victim of microorganisms. We have prepared salads, which are involved. So these all foods are very commonly associated with foodborne illnesses. You'll see when we talk about each of these organisms that these foods keep coming up repeatedly because they are not only supporting the growth of microorganisms, they are harboring microorganisms, but also because they are usually not cooked much, or after cooking they are kept for a long period of time and sanitary practices are not being followed, because of which the microorganisms enter the food. Now, microorganisms which are associated with the food industry can be either pathogenic, or they may cause spoilage, or they could be beneficial to us. So, we'll be talking about the foodborne pathogens in this video, and the other videos that I'll be uploading will have the spoilage and beneficial organisms as well. Now, the meaning of pathogenic is that they are causing an illness in a person who's consuming that food. Now, that illness could be either an infection or it could be an intoxication. Infection is when the foodborne illness is with the intake of microorganisms. So microorganisms are taken in and then they go inside the body, multiply, they start attacking the cells and you start showing symptoms. That is what a foodborne illness or infection is called. But foodborne intoxication or foodborne poisoning is one wherein there is already a toxin which is present in the food. The organism has produced the toxin and that toxin is causing damage in your body. That's what is called as food poisoning or food intoxication. So food infection and intoxication are caused by the pathogenic microorganisms. We also have spoilage organisms which are not going to cause an infection in you, but they alter the taste or the color or the texture of the food because of the enzymatic action. And usually, what happens is if the spoilage organisms are able to grow in the food, it means pathogens are also growing over there, which can be harmful to you. So, if you purely see with respect to whether spoilage organisms cause an illness, no, they don't. But it's the cohabitation of the pathogens which actually leads to the illnesses when we eat spoiled food. The last one is beneficial. So there are a lot of microorganisms which are useful to us in the food industry. We'll be talking in detail about that as well in a different video. So these are the three categories of microorganisms that we have. But which are these microorganisms? So the microorganisms that we commonly find in food or which are associated with infection or with intoxication or with spoilage belong to these four groups. Those are the bacteria, yeasts, molds, and viruses. Bacteria are very important in food hygiene because they cause the maximum number of cases of food infection or food illnesses or food poisoning. The microbial load may vary. In some cases, a small amount of bacteria is enough to cause the infection. In some other cases, you need a large load of bacteria to enter your body to cause an infection. But whatever it is, they are the major foodborne pathogens. When they grow on the food, they cause discoloration of the food. They produce certain pigments in the food. Some of them produce heat resistant spores. This is very important because they are thermophiles, and either you can have the growth of a thermophilic bacterium, something which is loves heat or able to grow at high temperatures, or even if the bacteria dies, it produces spores which are heat resistant, which is a big danger for us. The second group of microorganisms are the yeasts. Now, yeasts are one group of fungi which do not usually cause illness, but they are associated with spoilage. They are very much associated with spoilage. When they start growing too much in a particular food, it leads to fizziness, or you can see a lot of bubbles being formed. This is especially seen when yogurt gets spoiled, or when there is fruit juice which has been kept for a very long time. You can see that yeast starts multiplying in it and it leads to fizziness, or it might even give an alcoholic odor or a fruity odor. Yeasts also are involved in the acidification of wine. So they are basically involved in spoilage of food, and they usually prefer a low pH, acidic pH between 4 to 4.5. The third group are the molds. Molds are the rest of the fungi which are hyphal in nature, which are having filamentous hyphae, those are considered as molds. These molds are also usually involved in spoilage, but there are a few groups of molds or fungi which produce toxins called as mycotoxins, and these toxins are extremely potent. You if even a bit of that, a few micrograms of that toxin, if it gets inside your body, it can cause a lot of problem inside the body, even it can lead to death. So these toxins are usually produced in grains or nuts, but that is only a small group. Most of them cause spoilage and they love acidic pH, so they are easily found in foods which are having low acid foods. And the main problem with fungi is that they produce a lot of airborne spores. Now these spores can spread from one food to the other or from the soil to the food, and that is why they cause spoilage so easily. The last group are the viruses. Viruses cannot multiply in the food. They are only transmitted in the food because they need a living cell to multiply. And they're easily inactivated by heat, by sanitizer. You can easily kill them. But they are commonly associated with foods like oysters, cockles, and these foods which have minimal cooking temperatures. Those are the foods where viral food poisoning is commonly associated. The examples of viruses which cause food poisoning normally are the norovirus or hepatitis A virus, which causes jaundice. We'll not be discussing about them in detail in this video. We'll mainly focus on the bacterial infections, and we'll also look at one of the different protozoan infections. So apart from these viruses, molds, bacteria, and yeast, we do have protozoans which cause infection. We have algae which cause infection, but we'll not get too much into the details of those. We'll be only talking about most of the bacterial infections in this video. Now, apart from microorganisms, we do have chemicals also which can cause food poisoning. For example, if we take in heavy metals, yes, that can also cause a lot of problems. But we'll talk about all of these when we see the reasons for food spoilage. Now, let's get into some of the common foodborne infections. So salmonella is very, very common in India. It causes a disease called as salmonellosis. The species which cause salmonellosis are Salmonella typhimurium and Salmonella enteritidis. These two species are commonly associated with gastrointestinal infections, which means it comes in through the food. Of course, there are other species of salmonella as well, which cause typhoid fever or paratyphoid fever, which also comes through food. But these two species mentioned here are the ones which are involved in food infections. So these are gram-negative rod-shaped bacteria. Gram-negative or positive is something that is, designated based on a staining technique that's used in microbiology, that's called as gram staining. So based on that staining, we have two groups of bacteria, gram positive and gram negative, and this salmonella is a gram negative rod shaped bacteria. The common sources of this organism or how it enters into our body, like you can see here in the picture, is it's very commonly found in the animal feed. And if that animal feed, the contaminated animal feed, is given to the animals, then we have salmonella coming up in their meat, it comes up in the eggs, and when that is not cooked properly or it gets contaminated, then that is how the salmonella bacteria enters into the food and causes food infection or food poisoning. Now, the common foods which are associated with salmonella or salmonellosis are the raw and undercooked eggs. This is very, very commonly associated with salmonella infection. Even undercooked poultry or other meat is also involved. Fresh fruits and vegetables which get contaminated with salmonella, like you can see over here, or even unpasteurized dairy products can cause salmonella to stay in the food. Heat destroys the bacterium, so it's easy if we cook the food well. But the problem is when there is, no proper storage. Eggs are not stored in the food, in the fridge, so salmonella grows inside it, or there might be cross contamination, or the thawing may not be enough. That is, you do not cook it properly, the center of the meat remains uncooked. In such situations, the bacterium can come into the food and can cause illness in the person who takes it in. Now, the symptoms start showing after 12 to 24 hours and mainly include diarrhea, abdominal pain, fever, headache. These are some of the common symptoms. It can get fatal in the elderly or in very young children, or even in those who are sick with other infections. So otherwise, it's usually treatable, but then it can get severe in such people. The second bacterium that we have, or bacterial disease, is the one caused by Campylobacter. Campylobacter causes a disease called as Campylobacteriosis. So this disease was identified long back based on the symptoms it was told. And it was actually called as cholera infantum or summer complaint. That is how it was told, because it was very difficult to grow the organism, and it was difficult to characterize it. But then after the 1970s, they were able to grow the bacterium, and that is how it was recognized as a major cause of food poisoning or food infection. Though it is not fatal and it is usually self-limiting, so we get treated by our own immune system, the symptoms can become severe. For example, diarrhea or abdominal pain or nausea, fever, these can become very severe. That is why it is a very dreaded disease. In fact, in the United States is the most common bacterial cause of diarrhea. So this is caused by two species of Campylobacter, that is Campylobacter jejuni and Campylobacter coli. These are also gram-negative rods, but they're slightly curved or they're slightly spiral in shape. Now, Campylobacter is a common organism found, commensal organism found in the farm animals. So it's found in farm animals, it's found in pets, it's found in birds. It doesn't affect them. But when we come in contact with such animals which are having this bacterium, and suppose it gets into our body through the oral route, we eat something, then that's how we get the disease. So if how can we have that? Either you eat raw or undercooked meat or poultry, or you drink raw milk. You have not pasteurized the milk is raw from an animal which is affected, or water. Even through water it can get in. It can, there have been instances where the bottles of milk which were kept outside the door were pecked by animals. The lid of the bottle was pecked by animals, and just with that, Campylobacter entered the milk. So there are different sources which are coming from the animals, and usually within 3 to 5 days after we come in contact with the bacterium, we start showing the symptoms. The symptoms, like I said, can be very severe, but it's usually not fatal. So this was about the second bacterium, that is Campylobacter. The third one is E. coli or Escherichia coli. Escherichia coli is a common organism that is found in our body, but there are a few strains of it which cause a problem. The one strain which causes a problem, which is shown over here, it is also called as the enterohemorrhagic E. coli, or even the ETEC strain. These are two strains which can be foodborne. So what are they commonly associated with? They are commonly associated with ground beef, with cheese products, with deer meat, that's venison. They are with undercooked or raw beef and leafy vegetables. This is one, sprouts and leafy vegetables which are used in salads are a very common source of E. coli. So these are some of the common foods that are associated with E. coli. It enters into the food from human beings because it is there in our gastrointestinal tract. So if there is any kind of fecal contamination, somebody who doesn't wash their hands after going to the bathroom, but then they cook the food or they serve the food, that's how it enters into the food. And if it is these two strains, then it can cause diarrhea, it can cause sometimes bloody diarrhea, it can cause vomiting, cramps. These are the ones that are usually the symptoms that are associated with E. coli food infection. In fact, this ETEC strain is associated with something that is called as traveler's diarrhea or Delhi belly. So that there again, it is the E. coli which is involved. These are different strains of the same organism. The fourth one is Clostridium. So we'll be talking about two species of Clostridia. One is the Clostridium perfringens and the other one is Clostridium botulinum. Both of them are foodborne. So what happens here is they are actually gram-positive anaerobic rods, which means they cannot grow in the presence of oxygen. So they are usually associated with raw vegetables or pre-cooked meat. That is what Clostridium perfringens is associated with. It cannot grow in foods that are openly present. It's usually found in the soil, and from the soil it gets into the vegetables or into the meat or to the food handlers. Then the food gets contaminated, and when we eat such a food which has not been cooked well, or which was already cooked and kept for a long period of time, and such kind of foods are normally associated with the Clostridium infection. If we take in this Clostridium perfringens, what happens is that the symptoms are diarrhea, abdominal pain, and nausea. Now, like I said, it can come from soil, it can come from human beings who are a natural reservoir, and once the food goes inside, the organism will produce a toxin in the intestinal tract and show all of these symptoms. So recovery usually happens quickly, but that's not the case with Clostridium botulinum, which is a cousin of perfringens. In Clostridium botulinum, there's a toxin being produced. However, this is a neurotoxin, which means it is a very, very potent toxin that affects the nervous system, peripheral nervous system. So the symptoms are much more severe. It can even cause death. There can be respiratory paralysis, there can be impaired speaking, impaired swallowing, double vision, and finally, due to the respiratory paralysis, it leads to death. Almost 60% of cases of Clostridium botulinum lead to death. So the symptoms are more associated with the nervous system, for example, droopy eyelids, and these are all associated with home canned foods because, like I told you, it's an anaerobic organism. So it's usually found in cans which are not, where the canning procedure has not been done correctly, the correct temperatures have not been used. It's usually associated with such foods. So Clostridium botulinum and Clostridium perfringens, both of them produce toxins. However, this is a much milder version, whereas botulinum causes a much more serious disease called as botulism, which affects the nervous system. The next organism we have is Bacillus cereus. Bacillus cereus is a gram-positive rod. It's spore forming. So like I told earlier, these spores are the ones which cause trouble in our body. Now the organism or the spores are heat resistant. The organism may be killed when you're cooking the food. But if you don't cook the food well enough, if you don't heat it well enough, these spores survive and then they enter the body and cause various symptoms. There are two variations of the disease based on the strain. One of them causes diarrhea and abdominal pain, whereas the other one causes vomiting because it produces a toxin. So based on which strain of Bacillus cereus is taken in, the symptoms slightly vary, but all of these Bacillus cereus species are mainly associated with foods like fried rice, very, very commonly associated, especially because fried rice, you don't cook the rice fully. You parboil the rice or you partially cook the rice, then you add vegetables and just, sort of saute it for a bit. Now, if you do it the right way, the temperature is very high and the rice gets fully cooked. Even if there are any spores, they can be destroyed. But often what happens is it's just warmed with all the vegetables or the meat put into it or the eggs put into it. So the temperature is just right for the spores to germinate and cause infection inside your body. That is why this Bacillus cereus is so commonly associated with fried rice or with noodles, pasta, cereals, which are, which are kept for a long period of time. So when they are kept like that, the spores start germinating and they give rise to the organism inside your body. So corn flour, these are all some of the foods which are commonly associated with Bacillus cereus infection. The next one we have is Staphylococcus aureus. This is a gram-positive spherical cell called as a cocci or a coccus. It's spherical, round in shape. Now, Staphylococcus is commonly associated with foods such as salads, potato salads, with custard-filled pastries, with dairy products, especially the creams which are found on the top of a food, poultry products, cooked ham, or even many prepared sweets like trifles. The reason is because the staphylococcus is present on our body. So we humans carry the staphylococcus on our skin, in our nose, mouth, hair. All these, especially if we are having some kind of a cut or wound, these organisms will be around, and that's how they get into foods. And foods which are not further cooked, which are served directly or which are served cold, those are the ones which are commonly associated with staphylococcal infection. What happens here is the organism produces a toxin called as an enterotoxin, which causes symptoms such as severe vomiting and abdominal pain. Usually this disease is self-recovery, so we'll recover on our own. It's just that there will be severe vomiting, there will be stomach pain, there may be diarrhea as well. So these are the symptoms that are associated with staphylococcus infection. It produces a toxin which is called as enterotoxin. So it goes inside our body and causes all of these symptoms. The next organism, the last bacterium that we have, is Listeria. Listeria monocytogenes is also a gram-positive rod. The reason it is so important is because it is a cold-resistant organism. So even if you keep food in the fridge, this organism loves to grow over there and it can cause an infection. So this was not identified, Listeria was not identified as a cause of foodborne illness till around 1981. But then after that, there was an outbreak in US where around 41 cases of this listeriosis had come in, and out of that there were 18 deaths, mainly in pregnant women. And that is how it was linked. It was found out that there was a coleslaw is basically, cabbage containing salad. There was a coleslaw which was contaminated. The cabbage there was contaminated with listeria, and that's how it spread through the people who ate it. So the common foods which are associated with listeriosis are the cheese, or any kind of cheese, any kind of cooked chill meals. Cooked chill meals are those which are, you cook it and then you chill it and then you eat it. If you recook it, if you reheat it after that thoroughly, then it is safe to eat. But the problem occurs when you directly eat the meal. Or with coleslaw, which is again a type of salad commonly associated with coleslaw, salami, or any kind of meat, even vegetables can be contaminated from the soil. So any kind of ready to eat food, especially if it is stored in the refrigerator for a very long period of time, it can be having listeria monocytogenes in it. The reason being, the organism loves the cold and it starts growing in the cold temperature. So you can't actually, keeping in the fridge will not kill the organism. It will continue to grow in the cold temperature. Though in most people it just causes fever and muscle ache and fatigue or lethargy, it mainly affects the pregnant women. In pregnant women, it can cause miscarriage, it can cause stillbirth, it can affect the newborn. But even in people, if it is not taken care, even in other people, if it is not, you don't check it immediately, what happens, it spreads to the internal organs. It can cause meningitis, it can affect the spleen, gallbladder, lymph nodes. So it affects a whole series of organs in our body, and that is why listeriosis was considered as a very dangerous disease which is foodborne. So it is a common organism that's found in the soil. It's found in the intestinal tract of birds, sheep, cattle. This disease usually doesn't occur. It's quite rare. But the only problem being that the organism grows at a cold temperature. So once it enters the food, you can't remove it easily. If you cook it well, things are okay. But if you are serving it cold, then it may be difficult, or it may be carrying the bacterium. The last organism that we'll be doing is Entamoeba histolytica. This is a protozoan. So protozoans often cause foodborne diseases, and this is one of the protozoans that is very important, that is Entamoeba histolytica, which causes amoebic dysentery. Now this is associated with any food, anything that is unwashed or untreated. It could be water, milk, vegetables, fruits, anything which has been contaminated by fecal matter is prone to have, or is prone to cause, amoebic dysentery. It causes symptoms such as bloody diarrhea, cramps, vomiting, nausea, fatigue, abdominal pain. All of these symptoms, common symptoms, are associated with amoebic dysentery. So these were some of the common foodborne illnesses. There are many, many more organisms which are associated with food. Like I told earlier, there are viruses, there are many other different types of protozoans, and there are algae as well, which grow in the food or which produce toxins in the food and cause a host of symptoms when we eat such kinds of food. I hope this video was useful to all of you. See you in the next one as well.